Welcome to the Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind podcast with Corey Shapiro. We're taking a break from our regularly scheduled programming to share with you a conversation I had with online mediator Gabrielle Hartley. Ms. Hartley spent over 2 decades working as a divorce attorney, a mediator. Her special sauce is the ability to resolve the unsolvable conflict. She wrote 2 books, the 2019 book, Better Apart, and the upcoming 2023 book, The Secrets to Getting Along. She had a recent TED Talk. Our conversation goes through different things people need to focus on while getting a divorce. You can reach Ms. Hartley on her website, GabrielleHartley.com. That's GabrielleHartley.com. I find her to be very affable, very easy to listen to, very understanding emotionally of this process. And I hope you find this conversation useful. If you have any feedback for the conversation, please send me an email at feedback@gettingdivorced.org. Without further ado, here's our conversation. So, Gabrielle, before you get married, and I know people don't think about this, but as someone who's in the divorce world for a long time, do you think it's helpful to think about divorce, even though it might be unromantic, after you're engaged?
I mean, as someone who grew up with parents who were divorced, and I think this probably goes for many people who grow up with parents who are divorced, you can't help but to think about what might happen if things were to go sideways. And also you're asking me, and remember, when I was getting married, I was working for Judge Sunshine. And when I said I was newly engaged, Judge Panapinto came from upstairs to downstairs and said to me, Gabrielle, I have 2 words for you, prenup. There was no congratulations. It was just get a prenup. So yeah, of course you need to think about how things might devolve should that happen. I mean, the facts are the facts, and maybe it's not really half of every individual is going to get divorced, right? Because there's repeat divorces and maybe certain segments of the population are more or less likely than other segments. But still, it's something more than a de minimis percentage of us who are going to wind up uncoupled. So to answer your question, yes, think about it. And also pay attention to how you and your to-be betrothed handle issues right now when things are good, and watch how they handle things with the other people in their lives who they're maybe more comfortable and complacent about, how does he treat mom or dad and siblings, etc. That's not necessarily outcome determinative as to how they're going to treat you, because of course there's always a big picture. How are those people treating them? But there's information there.
Yeah. Is there anything in particular? Because in my experience, people really don't know that much about divorce until they're really serious about thinking about it. And it's really interesting because marriage is a legal relationship, but we view it as, at least currently, because it wasn't always this way, as a romantic relationship. So is there anything specific? I understand you're giving good tips about, in-laws, which I think is a big part of any committed relationship, especially, family times and traditions. But are they supposed to know anything about the actual divorce process or divorce laws? That's what I would be more interested about.
I think it's definitely a good idea to have a basic understanding about what would happen to property acquired during marriage versus premarital property, and what is designated to be premarital versus marital property. However, Corey, having worked all around the country, what I've learned, which is very eye-opening, is that those definitions change, and we're in a very mobile environment. And so I really think that having a prenuptial where you're figuring out all the details on how you want things to go is a great idea, because that will apply no matter where you wind up living. So if you get married in California, if you go to a California lawyer, they might say, oh, you don't need to worry about inheritances. That's not in the pot. And same thing in New York, unless it's transmuted, right? But then move to Massachusetts, and suddenly things that mom and dad left you get shared to some extent. And you're still the same people, but you live in the state for a month, that is going to either serve to your benefit or against your benefit. Corey, what's interesting is I've found in the last 5 years or so, I've had more and more people, mostly of the millennial generation, who have called me to ask these very particular questions for themselves. And I when it first started to happen, I thought it was kind of funny because like, who would do that? But it's actually so smart to talk to a lawyer and ask questions about your particular facts and circumstances. Because I could sit here and say certain basics, like you can't negotiate away child support, right? You can't decide what the parenting schedule is going to be. You probably can't leave your spouse of 25 years destitute, right? Like there's different inquiries as to fair and reasonable at the time the agreement is made. Some jurisdictions say, and it's a fair and reasonable at the time that it's applied, right? Things are really jurisdictionally dependent. And again, we live in a world where people move a lot. So it's important to understand the range of potential outcomes, and then to talk to the person you're intending to marry to see what feels fair to the two of you. And what better time to talk about that than, while you're still madly in love with each other.
Okay, so I think that's good advice for people who got engaged. Now they're thinking about this broad outlines about divorce. It's like, if you get life insurance, you don't necessarily want to die, but it's just practical to think about protecting your life and what will happen if you are no longer here financially to your family.
You are still more likely to die than get divorced.
Well, good. All right. So yes, that's true. So let's move on to someone who wants to do a little bit more talking about it, but maybe something, as you brought up a couple of times, the prenup, these prenuptial agreements, and they might be different in different parts of the country or different internationally, might be something different. But basically, the idea is to dictate how you want your divorce to go to the extent you can. I know some issues like maybe custody issues, we can't necessarily do that. But have you seen in your time doing this, maybe some common problems of these prenups? And I thought that might be helpful for people, because these are not be all and end all cures, right?
No, totally. And I'm so glad that you asked that question. So a common problem which comes up with prenuptials is people give away too much. The non-moneyed person often so badly wants to be perceived as not being greedy and not just being, getting married because the person has money, that they wind up saying like, I don't want any of your money ever. Okay, so now you're married for 25 years and you've lived a fairly comfortable life, and you've maybe, been a professional dog walker or babysitter or teacher, but living on a much higher salary, and raised some kids. And now you just, when you were 25 years old, negotiated away any right that you'd have to any kind of support. Or, let's say you said, oh, any property that belonged to the moneyed spouse will remain theirs. And then you move into that house, and now suddenly you don't have a house, right? And so maybe you're going to get some money towards rent, because in a lot of jurisdictions, they want implementation of a prenup to be fair and reasonable at the time that it rolls out. But what is fair and reasonable? So one way to correct for that is to, and any good lawyer will know this and will tell you to do this. You want to have provisions that sunset over time. So, you have one set of outcomes for this long, another set of outcomes for that long. You're married for 20 or 30 years, that's going to be different than if you're married for 5 or 10 years. Whether or not you have kids might make a difference. You really need to think things through and do your best to not think of yourself as being selfish because you're advocating to be financially on your feet. It doesn't mean that you need to take half of the $10 million that they came in with, but don't walk away from everything. It just doesn't make any sense.
Oh, I think that's really strong advice. I think people do feel a little guilt.
A lot of guilt. I mean, I have a hard time. I've had a hard time in the past sometimes doing prenups for people who just want to walk away from everything. The spouse with the money hands them the prenup and is like, sign this. And they're like, I don't care. I don't want anything. Well, don't come crying to me when you have signed away all of your rights, and then 20, 25 years later, you're SOL and there's not much you can do about it.
What do you think about these online prenup sites? I think they do. For me, I think they have a market, but I don't know in your experience if you would suggest them or what people should be thinking about if they're going to use them, and do they still need to have a lawyer after they use them?
Okay, so first of all, you need a lawyer before you use it. You need a lawyer while you're using it, and you need a lawyer after you use it. And my advice is not to do cookie cutter things that are going to have such a profound impact on your life. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Why do you have a prenup? Because you have too much money. And so you're going to do this, you're going to save $10,000 over $2 million. I mean, it all depends on what the equities are. But my advice is definitely to invest on the front end, because you'll be happy that you did so on the back end. Like, saving that little bit of money now. I know, like, very often, especially with first marriages, people don't have much money. And so they're reticent to spend money that they haven't really had access to yet, especially if it's like a family money situation or if they just earned the money in the last 2 years or whatever. But you have to really think through the fact that in the broader scheme of things, $5 or $10 or $15 or even $20,000, but it depends who's listening. Of course you can get a prenup done for inexpensive, but this is one situation where it may very well be that you are getting what you pay for. So if you're going to do it, I'm a big believer in like doing things once, doing things right, and then not having to redo it and not kicking yourself.
Yeah. I've seen actually people who actually have some resources for whatever reason, not use attorneys, and then they just make one or two mistakes, which may invalidate the whole entire agreement. And I ask clients about this, and I don't necessarily get any response that would make sense to me. So I think that's good information.
I have had people, I do a lot of mediation these days, Corey, and I've had couples come to me who want a prenup. And so what I do, I don't write their prenup, but what I do is I really push them in both directions to come up with something to then go to the lawyers with and let somebody draw it up and let the other person comment. So that way it's not like a cram down situation.
Okay. So now we are married and there's been an event during the marriage which calls maybe the marriage in question, and maybe the person has done some Googling or reached out to a divorce coach or divorce attorney and learned about a postnuptial agreement. What is a postnuptial agreement, and what are those things good for, or what are they good for?
So like a postnuptial and a separation agreement in substance are quite similar, but the difference is when you have a postnup, it's sort of like an attempt at a Band-Aid or a cast to hold the marriage together. Like, there's really not an intention to separate. It's just like, let's say one of the partners is a government employee and the other partner has always been an entrepreneur and they have some money that is kind of like in their pot, but they want to do something that the government employee views as pretty risky. Okay. So they don't want to wind up to be on the hook for like debts that would come out of this business venture, say, right? So you might make a postnup to say, I'm agreeing that you can do this thing. However, to the extent that there's debts created, the risk taker, are taking on all the financial responsibility that will not be considered a marital debt, won't even be up for consideration. So it's that kind of thing. Or say like somebody discovered that the other party was having an affair, right? And you live in a state where inheritance gets split, even if it's like 20% still, right? And so you're going to say, you know what? I'm going to stay married to you, but I want a postnup where you say, no matter what, you're not taking any of my, you're not going to take any of my inheritance. That's sort of your punishment for stepping outside of the marriage. Like people use it as a punitive thing. People also use it as a way to, they sometimes people use it as a sword instead of a shield, right? So they use it to sort of negotiate a better deal for the separation agreement when they know that the other party is going to some kind of screw something up. So it's a tricky topic, these postnups, and you don't see very many of them. You don't get, I haven't gotten many calls for postnups over the years. And when I do, once we get talking, we typically move it over to a separation or a stipulation of a stip or a separation agreement, depending where you work, what jurisdiction you're in, what it's called. And you might say in the agreement, this agreement shall not be used as a basis of divorce and shall not apply for X years, so that the people are committed to therapy or whatever healing things they want to do together.
So let's say now we're well into the marriage, but we're thinking about divorce. We've been thinking about divorce for a long time. We're just unhappy. But a potential concern that I see is we focus so much on getting that divorce, thinking that divorce is going to bring us happiness. But is it possible that we might be just blinded by this, maybe grass is always greener, or maybe blinded by the fact that we're just unhappy?
So in terms of whether divorce is the right answer or not, it's so personal. Some people stay too long from the perspective of people who leave quickly. Other people bail too quickly from the perspective of people who really stick with it. But my biggest piece of advice is to, before you just bail, do a good hard look at yourself and at your circumstances, the other things in your life that might be making you unhappy. Sometimes there's so many things going on that are upsetting in your life. It might be work, it might be with a kid, it might be with somebody else. And, your spouse, who is so annoying, they're the easiest thing to get rid of. And you might start pitting all of your upset on them. And they may be the source of your upset, but it could be something else. So I would invite you to consider first trying to clean up as much of the other things in your life before you bail on your marriage. And also, I shouldn't say bail, exit, right? Because bailing sounds like bad. And it's not bad if it's the right thing to do. But the other thing is to make sure that you're keeping your lane clear, right? I mean, again, it all depends on temperament and what you want out of life. And I've really come to terms with the fact that there is no answer, as to whether to stay or go. That's why people ask that question. And that's why, should I stay or should I go? If you Google it, there's like a million things you can read, right? Because it is so darn personal. But if you do want to stay, ask yourself if there's a way you can find greater happiness from within your marriage. Because if you watch my TED Talk, I tell a little bit of my own story, right? Which is that I spent a lot of the early years of my marriage quite frustrated with my husband, who I perceived to be like super selfish. He was always like hunting and running and traveling for work. And like he moved, I moved to be in a more remote location where he worked because he's a bird biologist, right? And I was making my life too small and I was blaming him, right? And then I was like, you know what? I had all these ideas of things I wanted to do. And that's when I wrote Better Apart. And that's when I started to travel more for work. And I started to take bigger and bigger and bigger cases. And I started talking a lot, on stages. And just like, I started to take ownership of my own life, because I figured like, okay, well, if I get divorced, what would I do? Well, let me just do that here. And like, either he'll accommodate or he won't. Right. And like, when I started to do it, I will admit, like, his first reaction was like, well, we're going to have to talk. I mean, he would like die. He's not going to listen to this. But like, he'd be like, we're going to have to talk about this like book tour. And I was like, well, I don't have to talk about anything. You need to stay home with the kids and I'm going on a book tour. Like, so, but, to your point, I sort of the mind that by the time people are hiring me, they have decided, they're grown-ups and they've decided they're going to be getting divorced. Now, I, at this point, do mostly mediation. It's two people coming in. But, I would say once a year, maybe I have couples reconcile, maybe twice a year. I mean, it does happen. And I always invite people, if it sounds like they're fighting more over something that seems low level, maybe you could look at this, maybe we could try that. And, again, there's just no one size fits all for this. There's no easy fix, unfortunately. If there were, people would stop Googling it because they would just know the answer. It's sort of like the prenups, right? Like you wouldn't need lawyers to draft up prenups if you could just do it easily online. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I was impressed when I learned about the change that you made in your life to make it better. And I mean, that's the highest research on anything. It starts with you. So I was really impressed that you first did the techniques and now you're sharing these techniques. So I think that's great. All right. So now the big question is, how do you tell children, and I'm sure this is age dependent, but this is a big one. How do you tell children you're getting divorced?
Yeah. So, I mean, so much depends on your children, their temperaments, right? Your relationship. Ideally, you sit down together, you explain to the children, depending on their age, right? If they're like school age, like between second grade and sixth grade, and you very simply explain things like, mom and dad have problems. They don't have to do with you. Always take it off of them, right? Your children, you get to be children. And we are totally committed to the two of you. We both love you so much. And this is the part that I love. You children are not going to run circles around us the way that can happen in a divorce, because we're going to be in good communication when it comes to your well-being at all times. And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, what is she talking about? There's no way. There are apps, there are ways to communicate where you can actually have meaningful exchange of information without, having dinner together or having a glass of wine with your ex. You can do things on an app. You can do things via a separate email account. And, in the beginning, it can be really hard, but to make your goal to have better communication, it's only going to serve, never mind serving your children, it's going to serve you, because you're going to feel better. Because when we have better relationships, everything trickles down from there, right? And the most important relationship to have a good relationship with is yourself. So if you hold yourself to the highest standard, then you're going to, it's going to come back at you most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. One thing not to do, to the extent that you can help yourself, is to not tell the kids on your own, and not do a lot of finger pointing, even if you feel like your spouse is the jerky one. Like, your kids know, your kids have been there, they see what's going on. At the end of the day, it all works out. Just try to be as clear as you can and as united as you can, and take the blame off your kids, because kids, from what I understand, internalize so much of the shame and the blame, like unbelievably so.
I like this idea of having a united front if you can. I mean, that for the children, because no matter what happens as you uncouple as a family, you're always going to be the parents. That doesn't change.
Right.
I haven't seen a judge change that, unless it's a very sad situation where they take away your kid because
right.
you're. So
that's very rare. Like, termination of parental
Yeah.
rights is quite rare.
Right. Okay. So now another big thing comes up when you're thinking about divorce, and a lot of reason people move on is because maybe you have a new partner. But how do you introduce this new partner that you're dating? You keep it on the side? And obviously, we're talking about with a divorce with children. Without children, I think it's a little different rules. You can basically, if everyone's an adult, do what you want. But if you have children, are you supposed to be open? Are you supposed to introduce these new partners? What do you see, and what do you would suggest?
So the first thing I would say is, you see things all over the place, right? Like, we people, we're all nuts. Everybody's crazy, right? So, like, one thing that I've loved about being a divorce lawyer is, like, I don't feel like self-conscious about my craziness, because I know you've got craziness, and so does every single person listening, like everybody, right? So what do I see? I see everything. What should be happening is you should not be introducing everyone you go on a date with. You should, I shouldn't say should. Oh my gosh, the word should is like such a big no-no. You make your best efforts to keep third parties out of your children's lives until such time that those people look like they're going to be with you for some period of time. And there's so many reasons for that. It's not because, I don't think it's because your kid is going to be confused as to like who their real dad is. I mean, like people say that, oh, they're not going to be confused most of the time. But the issue is more of one of having stability and security and dependability. Never mind any like moralistic overtones like, oh, you're not modeling good behavior. Like, forget that. It's just about your kids feeling confident and secure, and that the people who come into their lives are going to be there for a longer period of time. And again, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I do not have mental health backgrounds, but I have been doing this for a very, very long time. And I can say, like, I've now seen kids get divorced. I know that's like embarrassing to admit, but I have seen that. And, and that means that the kids are quite young when they get divorced. And some of them went through some pretty hard, rocky divorces themselves. So.
All right. One of the last things that comes up in this time when you're thinking about divorce is you want to move out. I mean, that's the whole reason you want to get divorced. You want to get some physical space. But if you have children, this might be problematic. And also, it might be problematic on a financial level to get two homes. So what do you suggest in these types of situations where you have a divorce, involves kids, but everything's telling you that you want to move out because you just can't stand being at home anymore, and you're just going to like blow off your top, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. So first of all, if you're going to blow your top, get out of the house, because that's the worst thing for your custody is blowing your top, right? That's the best way to get eliminated from your house. But generally, if you can take space and create like some kind of parenting plan, even while you're living together. During COVID, I did that with so many people because everybody was trapped in their houses. Most people were. And so you could really make a parenting schedule while still living together, depending on how much space you have in your house. Right. So you kind of have an on and off sort of situation, even with nobody's moving out, just casually. Okay, Monday and Wednesday is going to be my night to be in charge of dinner. So you're sort of staying out of each other's way, and Tuesday and Thursday can be your night. In terms of like, when can I move out? So I get that question all the time because, like I said, I mediate, and many of my clients have lawyers, but most of my clients don't want to call their lawyers for everything, right? So they say, Gabrielle, I want to move out. I'm signing a lease. Can I move out? And I say, well, you're asking me because I'm not your lawyer. And I'm going to say, sure, move out. Your wife seems trustworthy. But as your lawyer, I'm going to tell you, wait until you have a fully signed agreement so you know when you're going to have custody, parenting time, access to your children, so you don't feel like, oh my gosh, I can't get back into my house. The more you have hammered out, the more details you have written down, the better. And I really strongly suggest you have a fully signed, if not a separation agreement, then an agreement for temporary orders, whether or not it's filed with the courts, but something that is formalizing what your access schedule is. Now, what if you don't have enough money? I mean, like, one other thing that I'm finding a lot of people are struggling with is because rents are so high. I have a lot of work in New York City, and rents are so high and people really can't afford to have, 2-3 bedroom apartments. I have a lot of hard conversations. Are you going to move to another neighborhood? Are you going to pull your kids from private school? Are you going to get smaller places, right? Are you going to nest for a period of time? But with little kids, it's not like a really good long-term solution, nesting. So, these are hard conversations, and there aren't always easy answers.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is that time frame may be longer than what you want, which is an adjustment that people have to really understand if they're going to do things the right way. And if things go south in court, I mean, you should have everything memorialized. A lot of people don't. A lot of people take chances. But yeah, these are difficult situations.
And back to your question about boyfriends and girlfriends, here's another, hot take. Unless you guys have been separated for a while and everybody's got a boyfriend or girlfriend or has really moved on, if you're trying to resolve your case, just lay low with the new love interests, because it does not help you bring your case to resolution. It just doesn't. I've been doing this a very, very long time. And, maybe hearing that, you're rolling your eyes like, oh, you're so out of touch, but I am not out of touch. And I have seen a lot of near resolutions almost not work out because of a new girlfriend or boyfriend's mere presence.
No, I could totally understand that. And I agree with that. You never want to show more than you have to because you don't know how the other side's going to react. So I think that's really
Assume the worst. I think assume the worst.
Exactly right. Assume the worst is what, be as careful. Like if you go in front of the court, I'm like, we're not getting a wise judge. I used to think I would get a judge like your former judge, like Judge Sunshine, who's smart and thoughtful, but not every judge is going to be smart and thoughtful and wise. And that's what I tell my clients. You might get someone who's actually nasty, never read anything, he doesn't even know anything about family law. And that's our judge. And we treat that judge like it's a federal amazing judge because that's who we have. What are we going to do? All right, so let's move on to your strong suit, which is mediation. You left the court system to work in mediation, and I think you were doing a lot of mediation type stuff in court, and I think I do that too. We're all trying to resolve cases, and I think a lot of judges do that too. It's just a different style. When you have the court behind you, it's a little different than if you do it in your conference room or online. But one thing I've seen is there's usually a party who goes through the mediation process who might be more conflict adverse. And maybe this is a person you're talking about who's doing that prenup and it's like, I'll just give up everything. So how do you help those people, or what should the mediator do, or maybe some tidbits you can give this person?
We might have to have a few more meetings, or we might have to have a few more uncomfortable conversations. And I'm going to bring things up now, because if I don't bring them up, when they go to their lawyer, they're going to bring them up. Or 3 years later, when you have a problem, it's going to get brought up and it's going to be so much less pleasant. So I take people into breakout rooms and I don't tell them what to say, and I don't give them advice, but I give them information. If they're in New York or Massachusetts, where I'm a licensed attorney, right? I give them legal information. And I reflect to them what I'm seeing, right? Like I say, hey, I can see that you're not happy with this in the looks in your eyes, or the slumped over body. I'm feeling that this is happening, but I cannot advocate for you in the room, and you're going to need to advocate for yourself. And I don't do this like behind the other person's back. Like I say right in our first introductory, like, I'm not your mediator if you want to just take advantage of your weaker spouse. Like that's not going to happen. It's just not happening. And, most people stick with me. Do I lose some people because of that? I'm sure, but I don't care. It's fine. Like I want people who want good agreements, right? And there's always the right balance where everybody gives something up, and usually they don't care about the same things. And even that passive person can get a pretty good deal and not feel like they've been greedy, because they might care about non-economic benefits too. Not everybody cares about money, and not everybody cares about seeing their kids every day either, by the way. We have this whole new thing, like everybody has to have shared custody. You know what? Not everybody needs to have shared custody. And it's not a terrible crime to have sole physical custody. It might be better for both parties and the kid. And I think we have to be a little more flexible and not, help people not feel judged for not wanting to have 50-50. It's not always necessary.
Yeah, it's nice that you have this ability in your mediations to meet independently with with the party or with the person, because I do feel that someone who is conflict averse will feel much less pressure talking just to you, and especially if they trust the mediator, and they should trust a mediator, hopefully. They will be more vulnerable, and maybe through those communications, these types of issues can be worked out, so they don't necessarily leave things on the table that's important to them. And I agree with you, what's important to them varies. It doesn't necessarily only have to be the money. What have you seen, because just like we said, we assume the worst. So let's assume the worst now. Even though everyone's, we're going to mediation, how do we know that they're not just trying to manipulate the mediation process and maybe increase the time budget and just waste our energy? How do we know that, and what can we do?
We who? You mean the mediator?
Well, the other side who's just getting jerked around. Let's say that they go to mediation, but you know, things are just slow. That's what a lot of what I hear. Think agreements aren't being signed, but you want to give it a good faith effort to try. How do you know what's the balance between, is it just one session, or is it like 6 months? What should we be thinking about to make sure that someone's not manipulating the process?
Yeah, so that actually drove me crazy for a very long time. And so now 90% of my work or so is flat rate mediation, prepay. Both people have a vested interest in it, and it's use it or lose it within this period of time. So I really have gotten rid of having that issue. And I think a flat rate mediator where both people have a financial interest, because you've paid your $5,000 or $10,000, like you're not getting it back. You're going to go to those sessions. Whereas people who are paying a little bit here, a little bit there, like they're more likely to do that. And it is hard to know, right? It's hard to know because I think oftentimes I'll get a call where one person really wants to mediate, and I listen to them for a while and I'm like, ooh, you're not a mediation case. Like they start to say things about their ex, and, and then I refer them to somebody who, I'll refer them to my counsel in New York or Boston who litigate, because, mediation isn't for everyone. I do think it's appropriate for way more people than who uses it, than who use it. But it is not for everyone. And, if you find yourself that you're served and you have to go to court, it's okay if you have to go to court. Don't beat yourself up over it. Just always make your best efforts to come to a place where you can meet one another, as long as you're not compromising your fundamental inner needs. That's a whole other other episode, Corey.
No, but it's good information. What about mediation bias? Is there things you could tell? Because a lot of times I get these, after the fact, they say, oh, this mediator was biased, wasn't for me. How would you be able to tell in the session if a mediator is biased or not biased? And I'm sure this does come up, and I'm sure we all have our own biases, but I'm not just talking about our little biases that we may have. I'm talking about where someone really feels like they're just being railroaded, something like that.
Yeah. So, I think if you're in a mediation session and it doesn't feel right, like trust your gut, certainly. I'm always inviting feedback from my clients, especially because my clients are all prepay. And so like they need to know that they can tell me what they're feeling, how they're feeling. And, as a mediator, as mediators, we do a lot of training. I give trainings, I go to trainings to make sure that okay, well, maybe I was being kind of one-sided about that. Like we're all like that. And it's okay to be like, and that doesn't mean you have to overcorrect in the other direction, but having an open dialogue is super important. There are mediators, because I used to do a lot of attorney-assisted mediation. And so I would go in as the lawyer. And it is true, like when you're sitting as the lawyer for a party in mediation, you have a different perspective. And there are mediators whose biases are more obvious, right? Like there's mediators who are always pro the woman, always pro the man, always pro the working person. There's mediators who never stayed home for one day after they had babies, and then they have no patience for the stay-at-home mom clients. Well, that's not really fair, right? But I think knowing, as a mediator, knowing where you have your biases and even owning them goes a long way. If you're a listener and you're feeling like your mediator is against you or you're not really gelling with them, it's something to definitely talk about, even with the mediator. Your mediators can handle it. Mediators are, the sister or cousin of the lawyers, and we know we're dealing with people in conflict, and we know that people are upset, and it's okay. Like we get paid to deal with very hard issues during very trying times. So I'm a really big advocate of having communication that is as vulnerable as possible, because that's when the best resolutions are arrived at, actually.
All right. What about this? I believe you've done online mediations before it became very popular with COVID. But I also believe you've done in-person mediations. Is there a difference that you have seen with the online mediation where it's becoming more accepted? And, to me, one thing I see is like they don't have to be in the same room.
Oh my God. So there's a lot of I'm on like all these different panels, and like a lot of mediators don't like online. Mediators, I mean, right? They're comfortable in the office. They have this idea that, the parties want to be in office. I actually love online mediation. I think it is so much better for divorce. I can't say about for everything than in person, because people going through divorce, they are gut wrenched, most of them. And this way they can be in their own environment. They don't have to have those awkward conversations with their soon to be ex. If it's a situation where there's like mid to high conflict, or there's a new partner or whatever, they don't have to like run into them in the parking lot on the way to the bathroom. It's much easier to have those breakout rooms. I mean, it's not, even if you have a beautiful giant office space and you have plenty of rooms, it's so nice to be able to chat and say, hey, do you mind if I just have a quick private talk with him or her? And 9 times out of 10, people say, absolutely, and you can get through a lot. Because one of the things that I love with the breakout tool is that you can really have conversations and learn about your clients without having to have the other party listen to all the stuff they've already heard 100 times, right? Because a lot of times, like, both parties really want you to know everything, and you each know, they know everything. They've lived together. They've been married. They have kids. There's no new information. There's no like big secrets, right? Like, that's the whole thing. Like, people are like, oh my God, can I trust you? Like, there's really like, everything already, right? Like, the only thing you might not know is like, do they have a new boyfriend or girlfriend, which is not outcome determinative for anything anyway, right? So like, other than that, so I just think online is great. It is quicker. It is easier. I think it's less emotionally taxing for the parties. I know I do it faster. Like, I know that because you're just spending less time sitting with their emotion, having them like throw a glass of water at somebody, like the nonsense that comes up is really way down.
But what about recording? Because, they could record the mediations, which is supposed to be confidential. Does that concern you, and does that come up?
So I have every single person sign a very robust technology agreement, right? And quite frankly, today they could record you in office too, because it's not like you're going to have your grown-up client, turn in their cell phone, right? I mean, so anybody
Right.
can record anything. Sometimes I'm worried that there's a third party in the room, but when that has happened, usually people are like, nobody's here. But you're like, well, I just saw you talking to somebody. So, I mean, again, you have to have an open relationship with your mediator. You have to have clear communication. I mean, I don't spend a whole mediation session reviewing my retainer agreement, because I feel like that's like a waste of my client's time and money. But a lot of mediators do that. I do highlight the big points, like no third parties, no recordings, be online 5 minutes early, all the tech issues. I let them know up front. But no, I think it's great.
When I was going through your works, your book, your second book, which I know is coming out next year, gave me an advanced copy to look at, and looking at your TED Talk, and just listening to your podcast, I realized, I thought your superpower, and I could be wrong here, is you're a super communicator. And you have this ability, it seems, to reframe. And one thing I know in my mediation trainings, everything has to be reframed. So for example, if you think of supervised parenting time, that sounds heavy. Like, supervised parenting time, that's horrible. But then some judges will say, well, how about how about we just have facilitated parent time? You're like, facilitated? That doesn't sound as bad. And I've heard you say, for example, I know when you were a child, you went back and forth in your home, and some judges will call that ping ponging. You called it, flowing, which again, I thought that was a world-class reframe. So I think if we're moving away from mediation, where we're like, or we're in these difficult mediations because we say things that are triggering, we think things that are triggering. I just want to go through some things that I'm just going to give you some things I thought of as triggering, and I want to hear you.
Oh God,
reframe it.
I'll try, Corey. Well, I start off my beginning mediations if I have any inkling that somebody thinks the other person is like selfish or a narcissist, because I get a lot of calls saying, do you mediate with narcissists? I'm like, everyone's a narcissist. I start off by saying, everyone thinks their spouse is a narcissist. Some people are actually married to narcissists. Other people are married to people who are a bit self-centered. And when you're getting divorced, I will tell you, when I worked for Judge Sunshine and I read so many, they call them forensic evaluations, like the psychiatric psychology. I used to like wave my hand above and say, oh, obsessive, compulsive, narcissistic, because when you're getting divorced, that's how people act. So, I kind of normalize things a lot. And I say, well, I'm not a magician. I'll do the best I can. We'll see how it goes, but let's do all we can. I'll say in a breakout, let's not do name calling. Yeah, it seems really hard and they may be really difficult. And I'm sure I don't know what you're dealing with, but let's just try to lean into the process and see if we can, sort things out in a way that's going to work for both of you.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. So now let's say I'm thinking, or maybe I say this word, we can't resolve this because my wife's a gold digger. That's why.
I've never heard that. Isn't that funny?
Never heard that. Okay. So what would you reframe? Because a gold digger seems to be hard to move away from.
Yeah. So no, that's fine. I'll say, I hear that it's incredibly inflammatory and upsetting, and I totally get it to think that that your wife, who maybe even like had an affair, is now going to get half your pension, right? Because like nobody wants to share your pension, and I'm like, that is so hard to stomach, and I totally get it.
I feel you're already doing it. See, I told you this was your superpower. All right, so I felt more comfortable, and when you feel a little bit more comfortable, where someone understands you, someone accepts you, then you're more open to listening, and I think that's what you do really, really well. So let's talk about some co-parenting communication issues that come up, and we're on the verge of the holidays. So how can we make the holidays easier for co-parents who are going through maybe their first holiday season as either they're divorced or they're definitely uncoupled?
Okay, so here's the thing with holidays, and I've done like so many shows about like how to get through the holidays. Clarity. If you don't have a mediator and you can't get an appointment yet, try to work something out, make a little spreadsheet with start times and stop times, agreements. Like if somebody's getting them a really big present, can you go in it together? Do you have to meet each other's presents? I mean, there are so many ways that you can ruin your children's memories of the holidays. And I think if you put forward, like, what do you want your kids to remember about the holidays? And like, again, just do your best. Like, I have 3 kids. I'm sure I've done lots of things that have messed up all my kids. Like, we're just all doing our best. So I'm not like saying this, like, oh, if I were getting divorced, this is what I would do. But I know that the best thing for you to do is to have clear expectations from the outset, because you're going to find things to fight about anyway. So at least knowing the schedule, that should be very clear in your separation agreement. And if it is not clear in your separation agreement and your kids are young and, they're not teenagers, you just have a little while more to, and you have many years ahead, I highly recommend that you set up an appointment and, and you work with somebody very closely, as I've been doing with a lot of people right now, and set up an agreement for modification of judgment that clearly modifies the parenting plan for specificity. Again, you can always deviate, but you want to have a clear, enforceable, unequivocal agreement so that everybody knows their expectations and there is as little negotiation that has to happen through the holidays. People can just enjoy their holidays.
I think that word, for people who are listening to it, to being clear and specific, I want you to think 10 times more specific and more clear. And, when Gabrielle said the times, I mean, that's the start, but it's so easy to have ambiguity and to have problems. So I think you're 100% right to be as clear as possible.
I
And
mean,
it's going to be
on the flip side, I've had agreements where somebody was like, my son must have, 4.5 grams of this kind of protein every day. Like, you could go to an extreme, but definitely start times, stop times. You could even have a conversation about presence, because you can get into that whole competitive thing that you want to avoid. As much as you can hash things out with your mediator, the better. And again, like, give. And when you can't give anymore, give a little more, and your kids are going to be having better memories.
I love that. I love that thought. All right. So now we bring in attorneys. And this is a big decision people have. How do you choose the right attorney for you? Am I supposed to have someone who's, I heard this, like a bulldog? Am I supposed to have someone who's mediation friendly, but then maybe get slaughtered?
You need to know who your spouse is going to hire, right? Like sometimes people will call me and I hear who their spouse has and I'm like, oh no, I have somebody else for you. Because you can't have a mediation friendly attorney up against somebody who's going to play dirty. It's just not going to work. And it doesn't mean like the other lawyer is going to lie, or anything like that, although they may. But like you need to not be playing defense. The best defense in divorce court is a strong offense. That's just the fact, right? After I worked for Judge Sunshine, I did litigate for longer than I care to admit. And I had to learn, because my personality I'm not that way. And I really had to learn to be very, very aggressive in the court environment, because if you're not aggressive, you will get crushed. And so if you think you have a difficult person who you're divorcing, they're probably going to hire somebody very aggressive. And you need to also have somebody who's very aggressive. And it's very expensive and there's really no way around it. That's just the reality of it. So, it's like when you have to get dental work done and it's expensive and there's no way around it. It's a similar kind of thing, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's if I'm listening to that and I don't want, let's say my spouse hired a baddie. I don't want a difficult divorce. I don't want to go to court and spend all this money, but I'm hearing you say that I'm forced to. Are you telling me unless I move to like halfway around the world, there's no way out of this?
Even if you move halfway around the world, there's no way out of this. Get a therapist, get a coach, start taking like yoga or meditation, or, go to Pure Barre or Broadway dance studio, like whatever is good. Do something physical and really get yourself emotional supports, because it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and you might not be in charge of it. And that is horrible. That is like the most horrible thing. I've had things in my life, as I'm sure you've had things in your life, that you're not in charge, you're just not. And it's really hard. So the only way to get to the end is to go through it and try to surround yourself with the people who lift you up, your elevator people. Do your very best to keep your like energetically, I know I don't sound like a lawyer when I'm talking about like your energy lifted, but like you really want to have like your energy lifted, and you, anything that you can do to emotionally support yourself. We all have these narratives in our minds that are pulling us down. And the more that we can do to hush those vipers and keep ourselves in a space where we know that we deserve, we can have, we will get through. And you know what? A lot of times, even your high conflict spouse eventually gets sick of paying their lawyer, and you can still work things out. So don't lose all hope, even if it seems like you can't. If you can't settle it.
Well, I'm glad you gave some hope, because I do think it's a very challenging process. It's a very hard process. And I also like how you focus on self-care, which is focusing what's in your control, which is really almost only thing you can do is focus.
It's the only thing you can do. I mean, you have no options. It's not even like, because otherwise you can like really be at risk for falling into a depression, and that's not going to help you or your kids if you have kids.
Yeah. I think these are sound suggestions. All right. Moving on to just one or two more questions. All right. So let's talk about legal tech. I don't know if there's any legal tech, any apps out there that you suggest, maybe for co-parents or for just helping through this process that you found to be really helpful for people you work with.
Yeah. I mean, people like, there's payment tech like Decomply, and there's like co-parenting tech. There's the Fair app. There's the Our Family Wizard app. Like there's a bunch of things that can help you to sort out your payments and also to sort out your parenting plan. And they're a bit better than just using Google or Sheets, right? Because they're really tailored. The Decomply app, which it might have been integrated into the Leap system at this point, but just Google Decomply or look in your app store for Decomply. It's really nice. It's set up as almost like Venmo for co-parents with notifications and all that kind of stuff, like a lot of things. So like if somebody doesn't pay, you'll get an alert, and then if you have to file a contempt or an enforcement proceeding, all the paperwork is right there for you. So that makes things a lot easier. I'm personally not a very techie person. So, that's sort of as far as I'm going to go in that regard. There are, if you're a high net worth person getting divorced, there is an app called Detour Life, which can help you to organize all of your documentation. So if you have a tech-oriented lawyer and a tech-oriented partner, that kind of thing can be nice just as an organizational tool. My personal opinion is that none of the tech is quite there yet because the court system hasn't caught up with it. It's not really fully integrated. Not every lawyer is going to use it. So like, let's say you use it, but the other person's still using Dropbox. It's like not really compatible, which is why, I've tried a lot of different things personally, other than the parent communication, like the Fair app, FAYR, or the Our Family Wizard app for communicating and calendaring, and then Decomply for paying. Other than that, I think a lot of it's going to get there. It's amazing. I'm not insulting any of the tech. I'm just saying it's not there yet. We haven't met like Facebook of divorce tech.
That's true.
I don't know if Facebook's a good thing anymore, right? I don't know if I want to make a Facebook analogy, but.
Right. But I think your point is well taken. It's not like Google has made it a priority to make the most streamlined app out there. There is stuff out there that is helpful, but if you're expecting, something to work at that level, at that smoothness, it's not there yet. And I agree with that. All right. I know you have a lot of information out there in the universe, and if people want to go a little deeper dive than our conversation, where should they start?
So if you go to GabrielleHartley.com and you go into the About page and you want to look at the media, you scroll down and you can find all my podcasts and all the, all that kind of stuff. If you want to hear more, listen to different angles. And if you want to work with me as your online mediator, just go to services and then click online mediation. I also do strategic coaching and litigation, but online mediation is what I do most of the time. Just click there and you can read all about the packages and reach out, and I'd be more than happy to work with you.
Gabrielle, thank you so much for your time, for your vulnerability in this podcast and all your writings and your TED Talk. And I really want to tell you that you're doing great out there. I'm so happy you took your childhood experiences, like I was a product of divorce, and I think your parents seem to be more progressive than most and are really helping, as you say, move people better apart. So
thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Remember, this podcast is for informational purposes only. Please consult with your attorney before acting on the information contained in this podcast. Until next time, be creative, not reactive.